morning, everyone. It's great to have you here today. I'm Lisa Allen. I'm the Head of Consultancy for Data Programmes here at the Open Data Institute, and I'll be chairing this session today. We have a great session for you today, and we'll be discussing our world transformed, but who's looking after the data? So we've got a 30-minute session today, so feel free to put your questions in the chat. So without any further ado, it gives me really great pleasure to introduce our panellists today. So if I start off with you, Teresa, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Great, thanks, Lisa. So my name is Teresa Graham, and I'm the head of global product strategy at Roche for the pharmaceutical part of the organization. And the digital and data aspects of our business actually live in my group. And clearly, this is something data has always been critically important to healthcare. But I think as we consistently see the evolution of technology and biology and policy coming closer and closer together and how care is delivered for patients, it's really become an area of great and intense interest to ours as we figure out actually how to use data differently to make sure that we can solve the biggest health issues that are facing the world today.
That's excellent. Thanks, Teresa. Shall I come to you now, Deepak?
Yes, good morning. Thanks very much, Lisa. So I'm Deepak Kalra, and I'm the president of a European not-for-profit institute called the European Institute for Innovation Through Health Data. I've had a long career in electronic health records and health data, and the institute that I founded a few years ago really focuses on bringing stakeholders together so we can collectively maximize the benefit we all get from health data, but also help to drive up the quality and interoperability of that data, and trust, making sure that there is trustworthy use of data is a huge part of what we do.
Excellent, thank you. And then last but not least, Danil.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. I'm Danil Mikhailov. I'm the executive director of Data.org. We are a nonprofit. We call ourselves a platform for partnerships to build up the field of data science for social impact. So we fundamentally help social impact organizations make better use of data to drive their missions. By background, I'm a technologist and a social scientist. So I look at the problems through those two lenses.
Excellent, thank you. So as I said today, we've got 30 minutes. So the audience wants to put questions in the chat. We'll see if we can come to them later. So thank you for being with us today. It's really great to have you here. So what's this session about? So this really came about from thinking about the public's understanding of the role of data has really significantly changed, hasn't it, throughout the last 2 years of the pandemic. We've been seeing data used to show us things like the insights of progressive disease, but also inside the supply chains and inside and outside the health sector. And also in other areas right now with climate change and the march towards net zero. So never before have citizens had as much visibility of how data and data flows are governed and the role that data actually plays in all of their lives. So we've really seen this shift. So with that in mind, if I come to you first of all, Teresa, how do you think the pandemic has changed citizens' attitudes towards the role that data plays?
I mean, Lisa, I agree with so much of what you just said. I think that the pandemic has dramatically increased the public's understanding of the importance of access to and even more importantly, sharing of data by governments and companies to respond to global health issues. I think it is also, though, sadly highlighted how inadequate health data ecosystems are and how challenging but possible it is for health systems to deliver digital options to patients. I think we saw this in the very beginning as many countries and systems were making the shift to digital health and telemedicine versus having patients actually come in. It's likely also contributed to the increasing demands of health systems to deliver more data-enabled and digital services, which I don't see us going back from. So I do believe that the pandemic accelerated a lot of changes that were already happening in the ecosystem, but I think it cemented those and it's given the public a real sense of what's possible when the right players work together in an environment of trust.
Yeah, no, they're great points, aren't they? Definitely. And what about you, Deepak? What are your thoughts on how the pandemic has changed citizens' attitudes?
Well, I think it has been a very powerful influence. So I fully agree with Teresa. I think, firstly, though, I mean, we've been on a journey for years to raise public awareness, but also other stakeholder awareness of why data is important, building up examples, case studies. We've been contributing case studies of data delivering a societal value whether through a piece of published research or through a productized piece of research, doesn't matter. The main thing is delivering value. I think what really caught the public unaware, though, was how suddenly we had massive knowledge gaps that were not affecting a small patient group, but everybody. So which drugs are making the best difference in an intensive care unit? Whose respiratory function does get better? Who deteriorates and why? Which patients are likely to get more severe complications? And the trouble was, this data, I mean, Teresa, again, absolutely right. We were really unprepared for a global intelligence ecosystem. Terribly unprepared, but what the public saw was that almost no country had enough patients to learn enough, and that we had to collaborate. And this, I think, was really powerful. The other thing is, in the end, the thing that has really saved us is vaccinations. Well, who makes vaccinations? The answer is industry. If you shut them out of the data ecosystem, we would not have got our vaccination. So I think not only the need to learn fast, near to real time, the need to learn cross-border, but actually all the stakeholders come together, public and private, to help us win. And these are the big lessons, I think, that have really resonated that I've heard.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, I think, about that public and private working together. I think that ecosystem holistic view is definitely needed. And what about you, Danil? What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I agree with my colleagues just now completely. I guess I would draw both the positive and the negative highlights. I think the historians of the future will look back and see the pandemic as a watershed in our individual relationship to data and data-driven technologies. On the positive sides, completely agree. Data and technology has saved lives during the pandemic. One of the things I did just before my current job in Data.org, I was head of data at the Wellcome Trust, a global health charity, just as the pandemic was hitting. And we were able to work with both private sector, to the point just made, and public sector and academia to accelerate how data is shared after clinical trials, to compress the ability to analyze results of clinical trials from what's normally could be as long as 2 years to weeks. So you speed up the understanding of of what vaccines, what drugs are effective against COVID-19. So that's the positive side. The other positive example, modelers, for example, have become heroes of the day. We see the results of their work almost every day in our newspapers and our media, understanding what's happening in the future. On the other side, many governments, most governments, have really increased surveillance technologies. In many cases, for good reasons. The question is, will those technologies be rolled back after the pandemic crisis is over? So it changes the balance between the individual and the state significantly. And I'm not just talking about China, for example, other countries, whether it's South Korea, Taiwan, etc., have invested in this technology, so have countries in the West. So it remains to be seen, but it certainly has changed the relationship between the individual and the state, and it has increased the awareness of citizens about their data and their privacy and how it's being used.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's almost a bit of a dilemma, isn't it, for sometimes, I think, for citizens, because actually you want those results, but the privacy is also wanted as well. So there's a real balancing act to be had there. That's really good points. So thinking about what impacts this has had on citizens, their expectation then on how their data should be governed, I think that leads nicely into that point. I don't know, Danil, did you want to pick that up first on that one?
Absolutely. As we say, there is absolutely a balance to be had. We need access to data. We need better access. As my colleagues have said, there were many gaps in the data ecosystem exposed by the pandemic. At the same time, we need to respect privacy. Luckily, technology can help us if we use it in a careful way and build trust with the communities as we use it. So we can invest, for example, in privacy preserving technologies. We can invest in federated learnings where you don't need to move data from one place to the other, increasing the risk of it being, of privacy being breached, but push the analysis to where the data sits. The key to this, though, is an approach which is interdisciplinary. So we need to understand that it's not just about technology, it's about building and retaining trust, which means a dialogue with citizens and dialogue with patients, a dialogue at all levels of society. So you involve individuals in the decisions and the design of these architectures for data.
Yeah, that sounds good. So I was just thinking, does that link on some of the work that you've been doing at Roche with your playbook, with how you're thinking about the governing of data?
Yeah, 100%. And, I think the comments that both of my panelists have made over the last two questions really underscore sort of two things are going to be necessary for us to make meaningful change going forward. And that's transparency and trust. It is going to be critical that data continues to be available to all the people who need it to actually make these sort of population-based health decisions, and to think differently about how we both understand what health crises mean to us, but also how we can address them meaningfully and as quickly as possible. But if we don't have transparency for people into how their data is being used, who has access to it, what the outcome is going to be, what happens to their data afterwards, if we don't have shared understandings between the public and private sectors around data privacy and data security, that trust breaks apart so quickly. And once it's gone, it's going to be almost impossible for us to get back. And I think we're starting to see the cracks of that already. And I think it would be really sad for us to take a really big step backwards when a little bit of transparency could solve and address a lot of the concerns that are out there. And I really hope we can find a way to maintain the advances that we've made.
Yeah, no, they're all really good points. So Deepak, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, echoing again my two colleagues, we're doing a lot of work, we're holding at the moment a lot of multi-stakeholder consultations and reports on the transparency and trust topics. What might that look like in practice? What are the elements of trust that can be built into data access decision-making, for example, and data sharing? And then what might transparency look like? But there are a couple of things that I think are additional facets to consider here. One is education. There is a real need for digital and data literacy across the population. We've underinvested in those. And I think although health literacy is already a big topic and a big gap, I think as we move towards a digital environment and we're asking people to trust a whole load of data-related activities, they have to understand that. That includes not only what is data, how does it get used, what are the benefits, but what does data protection mean and what are the kind of measures? I mean, Danil, you mentioned a number of technological components. What is a federated architecture? How does the public understand that concept and so on, and data protection, information security? But there is another side of it I think is very important. And it's something I learned as a lesson from some of my other public-private projects. And that is that when the public or even public body stakeholders watch industry collaborating, it really alters how they view things. So for example, picking on you, Teresa, if Roche came and said, can I have some data or whatever, that there seemed to be a potential, commercial value in that. But when 10 companies come together, like in our Innovative Medicines Initiative project, and they come together pre-competitive and say, we're trying to learn from data in this way, we're going to share the results and so on, it transforms the conversation. So I think part of what we have to now do is show that in the health data ecosystem, the public and the private entities are working together to maximize learning. They're contributing towards our overall knowledge pool in best practices, technical and governance best practices. We're all working together. Public, I think, will feel much more comfortable to trust what they see as a collaborative learning environment rather than a bunch of different players all scrambling to get hold of data.
Go on, Danil.
I think, yeah.
Using the physical hand.
Yeah.
Old school.
Absolutely. No, I agree entirely with on collaboration. One extra point I would make there is when the private sector is involved, collaboration absolutely is the way forward. We need also, however, in order to build trust, make sure that we invest in open technologies and open sharing of results and benefits. I'll give you an example. So in the early days of the internet, companies invested in the underlying architectures of the internet and open sourced them. So a lot of the underlying code and protocols were a layer which was available for others to build upon. And I think that we need to see the same in health data. So absolutely all for collaboration with the private sector and as you say, not one-to-one collaboration, but hopefully consortia coming together. But I think in this first instance, we need to make sure the private sector is building technologies in an open way. Later, they can build on top. So I fully buy into the idea of you can then get an investment and products from which you have a return. But let's build a joint layer of data architecture for all of us, which is open sourced and available to everyone.
And I really feel that that spirit is there. Whenever I interact with industry, whether it's pharma or life sciences or the tech sector, and our institute has to be neutral. We always work in a neutral way. So even if one company wants us to do something and they're willing to pay us, I say, okay, that's fine, but the results have to be shareable. And I have found that's just not a problem. There's a real willingness to follow exactly the spirit of what you just said. Let's be optimistic about that.
Do you think that's come about, Deepak, because of the pandemic? Do you think that's pushed that?
To be honest, no. I think it was there already. It was growing. I started working more closely with pharma now a decade ago, and there was already that spirit. And actually, the first time I started my very first RMI project, I was co-leading it. I was blown away by the extent of pre-competitive sharing that was taking place that I was unaware of before. And I think actually when I also speak to some of the big tech giants, even though they've all got to commercialize something, these aspects are not the areas they make their competitiveness. So they're very willing to contribute because they know that if there is a big data ecosystem that is thriving, that the public will be supportive of that and also everybody will gain. It's been going on for years, but COVID has given us a public visibility acceleration that we must welcome. Despite hating the disease, we must welcome some of these spin-offs, but also we must not now go backwards. We must keep that momentum up.
And just to pile on there, sorry, Lisa, really quickly, I didn't raise my hand. It really lends to this idea that we have to challenge our fundamental assumptions about what we believe is true about the other party across the table. Because if we hold on to those assumptions, we won't even ask the basic questions that could lead to some very wide and open doors if we just had a different perspective and mindset about what that other person might be thinking.
No, that's a really good point. And I think it is about capitalizing on the changes that have been made during the pandemic, isn't it now? And I think you're right, Deepak, about not going back. So thinking about that, so do you think, what impact do you think it's had on companies responding to the pandemic, to this change? Do you think it's accelerated it? What sort of impact has it had on them? Should I come to you, Teresa?
Sure. And I think it has had some really fundamental changes, and I don't think some of those things will go back. So, I think about my own industry, it's forced us to really pivot very significantly about how we deliver our clinical trials. We shifted to delivering virtual clinical trials, and this enables us to reach patient populations that previously we might not have been able to. And ultimately, our hope is a very positive side effect was that it will support us in delivering more equitable care, which is certainly a goal that we have. And I am very, very hopeful that lasts beyond the pandemic. I think we also saw COVID really start questioning the delivery of care and what transformations are needed on just how things work on a day-to-day basis. So, for example, a recent WHO survey showed that in 42% of countries, cancer care delivery has been very significantly disrupted. And I think this is going to force healthcare systems everywhere to adopt and hopefully keep those digital technologies, health data infrastructure, all of which need to support remote patient monitoring, point of care testing, telemedicine. The move to electronic records has already been underway for some time, but will that really accelerate our ability to find meaningful and actionable data in those? I mean, the implications for people in sort of point of care and how they experience interacting with our healthcare systems, I think has changed forever. and hopefully how healthcare systems think about and use their data, and then how we as the global healthcare system architecture sort of think about, again, accessing, utilizing, and using that data to further transform. Hopefully that's changed forever as well. Time will tell, right? I think we had a very common enemy during the time of COVID, and that helps a lot. It helps a lot when everybody is driving towards a very single objective. I think now we have to shift our mindset to how are we going to defeat COVID, to making sure that every mother, father, sister, brother, daughter, son has the kind of care that we would want them to have, regardless of where they live in the world, regardless of the color of their skin. And you know, those are lofty goals that I think we've been after for a long time, and data is really the solution there. So how do we make it happen? And that's, I think, the next challenge for us.
Yeah, definitely making sure we're capitalising that. And then coming to you, Deepak, we've had a question about when your project research report will become available. Have you got a date for when that will be available?
Well, so yes and no. The report that I was hinting at, multi-stakeholder consultation, actually has just become public. I was sending emails out to friends colleagues yesterday to say, here it is. So I can certainly share it with the panel, and I can share it with you, Lisa, and you could then maybe look at whether you want to make it available through the event. Very happy to do that. But, you know, we are on a journey. So any installment of multi-stakeholder consultation is one more step. Also, you know, we are talking about here consensus among people. We're not talking about an endorsement by a formal body or a decision-making body. So what we are doing is gently saying, here is how a group of different people from different sectors come together, think are the best ways we might go forward. But it is about encouraging convergence. We certainly want, for example, that the ways in which decisions are made about data access are as uniform as possible, because a lot of our learning has to be, geographically broad, but also public goodwill and public buy-in is going to be very difficult to engage if every country adopts different rules. It doesn't help bring coherence along the public either. So yes, we're producing a report. I'll share you a link, but we're on a journey and we're always looking for opportunities to do more of this. So in fact, having heard my two panelists, I think, gosh, I want to spend some more time with them and see how we can build up even more detail on these topics.
Excellent. That sounds brilliant. Thank you for sharing the report. And then we'll see about getting that out to the people who attended. Danil, so what about you about thinking about the impact the pandemic's had on companies and response to this change?
So absolutely. The pandemic has had an impact on everyone at every layer. I think companies are investing or have found a real reason, if they haven't had it before, to invest in their data maturity and data infrastructure. One thing I'll highlight, though, is the gaps between those who are at the front and those who are lagging behind is growing. And that's true within industry, but it's even more true within, for example, the social impact sector, which is what Data.org cares about in particular. The gap between the private sector in general and their ability to use data and the social impact sector is growing faster and faster. It's partly because of resourcing. It's because of the brain drain, the inability of social impact sector, for example, to compete with the biggest players in the tech sector for the best data scientists, the best data engineers, software developers. So all of that is making the gaps bigger. So I think as a society, what we need to do is, Deepak said, education, and I fully agree with him. It's about investing in society in the next generation of engineers, of data scientists, but also making sure that we have the incentives for them to be spread widely and broadly across all our sectors, not just industry, but also social impact, also academia, where again, there's a brain drain problem in the highest tech roles. So it's about training next generation of data scientists, potentially training them to be different, by the way, more diverse, more women in engineering, more minorities in engineering, making sure there are centers of excellence, not just in the global north, in Seattle or San Francisco or London or Paris, but also in the global south. So creating capacity across the world, and also investing in interdisciplinarity. One of the things the pandemic has shown us, there was a bit of research done looking at the application of AI for identification of COVID over the pandemic. And it showed that a lot of the initial attempts have failed. Why did they fail? So the products being produced didn't indeed identify COVID in the way they claimed. The reason for the failure was often technologists were trying to make a solution without involving subject matter experts. So that points to the need for interdisciplinarity in training of capacity. We need to build up data scientists who are not just great technicians, coding in Python, understanding deep learning models, but also understand the subject matter in which they work, whether it's health data, whether it's climate data. Understanding that kind of broader context is very important.
No, definitely. I think that really pulls out actually that the data literacy that is needed and that skills that's needed. And if we don't bridge that gap, the problems that will come. And we've had a question actually come in from the audience on that. I just wonder who would like to come in on this one. So they were asking, who is the we when we talk about we need access to data? Because access to data raises the question about what type of data is accessed and who owns and that data that's being accessed, and whether personal data is meaningfully protected. So it just says that access can mask the issues of digital labour that are not literate in this. So who do you think the we is when we talk about that access to data? Who would like to come in on that? Go on, Deepak.
Okay, I mean, it's a massive question. This would be almost its own panel, so we'll have to try and be a little bit focused here. So firstly, I think what we've identified is that there is a mass range of stakeholders who all contribute to learning from data. And so the we in terms of who needs to learn from data is a massive list. And I don't think we can enumerate it. That would take the rest of the panel. So let's just assume that. But let's not forget one other stakeholder. We are at risk of thinking that patients are the people who are the data subjects and everybody else learns from their data. When we engage with patients and patient organizations and also, healthy citizen type organizations, what is very clear is people actually want to learn from their own data too. And so we need to say that the people who are the data subjects are inside the circle of the people who want to learn from their data. And I think if they also are able to learn from their data, one example is that a number of patients, not only do they want, to see their data and play with their health data on an app, they'd love to be able to compare how they're doing with anonymized aggregate data from patients who profile like they do. So as if people have this level of severity and then they have this procedure, and it's 8 weeks later, I'm finding I can walk this far. Is that very typical or not typical? Wouldn't it be wonderful? And how easy it would be to do. You can imagine the queries that could be run on the ether and would easily give them that kind of information. Once we make data deliver back to the people, they will understand even more why everybody else needs it. And I think that is an important mission we must not overlook.
Definitely. Thank you for that. So just thinking about, we've only got a few minutes left. So how do you think governing data can lead to that trust and innovation, that business opportunity we thought about? Who'd like to come in on that one to start with? Should I go to you, Danil?
Yeah, of course. So we've mentioned some of the things as we went along in the discussion. For me, first and foremost, it's about the building and maintaining of trust at all levels. It is through the policies you set in your organization in terms of data governance. It's in terms of investing in data stewardship, so how you implement those policies. It's about investing in data literacy, and it's about having an equitable sharing of who gets the benefits of the data, and a transparency about the process of how you share those benefits. So all of those things at different layers, I think, are behind making a successful and equitable implementation of data.
Excellent, thank you. What about you, Teresa?
I mean, I think so agree with all of that. And I think the who is we. We all have to have and play a part in this as patients, as individuals, as the professional hats that we wear. And that's what makes data governance really, really critical. You can't have that kind of transparency and you can't have that trust if you don't have a shared set of assumptions about what data is collected, how it's going to be used, and what outcomes are going to be generated using it, and who has the opportunity to see it and at what level of detail. So I think data governance is the next big hill that we have to climb, and we have to find a way to do it, frankly, across borders, because having 150 different versions of what data governance looks like is going to completely enable us as a global society from advancing in the way that we need to.
Thank you. And Deepak, what is your thoughts on that?
Well, again, I agree with the others. I think for me, one of the most important elements of trust is the purpose for which somebody wants to use data. So I think having an openness about why data may be used, and in particular when one is dealing with companies that may, or even other organizations, public ones that are massive and have many different departments and functions, saying, releasing data for a purpose to a team within the organization is not a slippery slope to meaning the marketing department can get it. They can't. And I've worked a lot with companies who are really clear that they can do that. They can protect. You're releasing data to a team conducting an investigation into a particular disease area. We'd like to spread that to 2 or 3 other disease areas, but no, marketing won't get their hands on it. And we can promise that. And I've heard that so many times, and I've written codes of conduct that industry has been happy to sign. So I think we've got to make the public focus not on, is this a commercial entity or not? Is this entity in the US or is it in Spain or not? But actually focus on the purpose. Why? What is the beneficial purpose for which the data needs to be used? Let's push people to focus on that point.
That's perfect. Thank you for that. And that is our time. And that's a wrap for today. So thank you for our panelists. It's been really insightful. So for our audience, if you enjoyed this session, don't forget to visit the booths we have on secondary use of health data. We've got the Roche Data Governance Playbook and My Health Data. So thank you all for a really enlightening discussion. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.